In the next few decades, the world, as we know it, will change a lot. This will of course bring many opportunities, but also many challenges. More precisely, most developed countries are facing such a large threat that their response may determine in economic, political, and social terms which countries succeed and which fail. Folks, I'm talking about population aging, of the demographic pyramid's 180-degree turn. Yeah, I'm sure this isn't news to you. Most of you have probably already heard about this subject. However, have you stopped to think about the process's consequences? Are your governments doing something about it? Have they come up with something like a contingency plan to face the risks that lie ahead? Now listen up.
The world facing a new stage.
In about 100 years, our world has changed a lot. It has changed so much that if we got a time machine, say some sort of special DeLorean, and traveled back 2 or 3 centuries for a season, sooner rather than later, most of us, if not all of us, would want to go back home really, really fast. We'd be missing loads of things, we'd be horrified by the day-to-day, we'd be forced to work intensely hard just to survive, and we'd be afraid of getting sick because we might die, and we might not even be able to eat. But let's stay on topic here. The fact is that at the end of the 19th century, the world's population surpassed the 1.5 billion person barrier. And yet, only 100 years later, during the 20th century, the world's population has multiplied by 4 and surpassed 6 billion people. And of course, considering the enormous speed with which the world population grew, we can't be surprised by the fact that many experts began to worry about overpopulation. And do not think that this was just a thing among mediocre experts, scientists, and politicians. In 1974, a report by the Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, urged Richard Nixon's government to consider birth control in countries such as Brazil, India, Mexico, Colombia, Ethiopia, and Thailand as a top priority. According to the report, the demographic explosion that was taking place posed a serious threat to the very security of the United States. With so many people consuming resources, Kissinger thought we were heading towards a world of scarcity and fierce struggles for resources. Have you noticed how Malthusian arguments come up again and again, even though they never actually happen? The fact is that while guys like Kissinger tried to think about how to control the world's population and influence their decisions, a change was already taking place. Such a huge change that it would turn an entirely new point in the debate. In the last 50 years, world fertility has halved, so much so that nowadays Western governments no longer think about overpopulation, but rather about aging. Today, European countries and even the United States tend to lose native inhabitants. Check this out. In Germany, for example, since 1972, there have been 5 million more deaths than births. However, the most extreme case has been that of Russia, where in just 20 years, between 1991 and 2011, there were 13.13 more deaths than there were births. Future projections show that in the next 50 years, Europe's native population will decrease by around 100 million people. And not just that, the other effect of this entire process is that the world's population, especially that of the most developed countries, is aging at full speed. And that, my friends, it's posing many challenges. Pensions, healthcare expenses, dependence, and the question is now, how on earth can we finance this gigantic expense? To give you an idea of what we're talking about here, it's estimated that in many European countries, the percentage of the population over 65 years old will be around 40% by 2050. And one of those most affected countries is actually Spain. So listen up.
A country of retired people?
Here's an exercise for you. Let's assume that fertility in Spain and the European Union remains within the rates that they've had since the year 2000, and that in addition, no immigrants arrive. You want to know what's going to happen? Well, check out the following graph. As you can see, the population aged between 18 and 40 years, which is the population that works the most and the population that has the most children, that's going to take a huge dip. Of course, the number of inhabitants just a decade later that follow the same trend. Folks, Spain is one of the countries that's beginning to suffer the most from this demographic crisis.
The demographic crisis is getting worse. Spain suffers its biggest population loss in 2017.
If we take a look at the average number of children per woman, we can truly understand what's going on here. And this is taking into account that the arrival of immigrants in the last 20 years has boosted birth rates. Nowadays, 23% of all children born in Spain, almost 1 in 4, have a foreign mother. But perhaps the most important data to predict what's going to happen will come from looking at how the number of people of working age will evolve. They, after all, are the ones who generate the vast majority of resources, both public and private. Well, if we assume that there's no immigration, in just 30 years the working age Spanish population would decrease by 10 million people, and according to the projections of the Institute of Statistics of the Government of Spain, Spaniards will face this panorama by 2050. 19 million people of working age, of whom of course not all will work, and almost 22 million children and retirees. That is, the dependent population would be greater than the working age population. Now, we're talking about Spain specifically here, but this scenario is very familiar to most developed countries. As you can imagine, all of this has many consequences.
Consequences.
In recent times, there's been a lot of talk about the risk of automation. But perhaps the most imminent risk that developed countries have to face is their quick aging process. At the end of the day, it's clear that an aging population has several consequences. For one, it's foreseeable that if nothing changes, public spending will skyrocket to pay pensions, healthcare expenses, assistance, and care for the elderly, among many other things.
Pension spending increases by 50% in Spain in 10 years.
And no doubt this will be very clear to politicians. The hegemony of retired voters will be overwhelming. It's simply a matter of votes. But at the same time, as we've seen, there are going to be far fewer working age people, so the question is, how on earth are we going to pay for this huge expense? Will the already high taxes be raised even further, damaging the competitiveness of countries with as many economic problems as Spain or perhaps Italy? Well, the reality is that's a recipe that just doesn't work. Now, at this point, I think we need to answer a mandatory question, and that's, well, what the hell can we do?
We need a plan.
I know, politicians don't usually like to think about the future, especially future problems. Probably goes a little something like this. What? I need to think about problems that will happen in 20 years from now and risk losing votes? No. Let's let someone else take care of that. Well, if we don't want to see headlines like this, developed countries are going to need a plan.
Japan's finance minister tells elderly they should hurry up and die to help reduce country's rising welfare bill.
The time to make decisions is now, and countries that decide to look the other way and do nothing will face many problems in the future. You see, lately here on VisualPolitik, we've talked a lot about immigration. Well, experience tells us that this is a good way to stop population aging and buy time to make new reforms.
As Australia, Hong Kong, New Zealand, and Singapore have shown, immigration can soften the blow from rapid aging. Chang Yong-ri, director of the Asia-Pacific Department at the International Monetary Fund.
Yes, despite many politicians' discourse, the truth is that developed countries will need many people to arrive from abroad. So, folks, instead of thinking about building walls and closing borders, it would be much more advisable to start a system that manages to attract people from outside in an orderly fashion and facilitates their integration. But of course, that's not all. As public pension systems will almost certainly become much less generous because they won't have as much of a budget, governments should also be promoting saving, both from the governments themselves and from families.
Is any Spanish political party warning citizens of the inexorable cut in their pensions? No, they're all silent about our true future, giving a false impression that one doesn't need to save to guarantee a fairly dignified retirement.
Juan Ramon Rayo,
economist and director of the Juan de Mariana Institute.
And along with all this, of course, governments should promote policies that attract companies, that promote entrepreneurship, and above all, that favor productivity, investment in machines and technology, and in research and development. Yes, I think robots are actually going to greatly help with this problem. Unfortunately, in many of the affected countries, including Spain, nothing is being done. And finally, before we finish, I'd like to throw out an idea. See, the effect of aging is accompanied by a longevity effect. Allow me to explain this. Thanks to medical advances, better nutrition, and higher quality of life, mortality rates for all ages have decreased. That is, people are younger for longer. See, in the United States, for example, a 75-year-old person has the same mortality rate today as a 65-year-old person had in the 1950s. In Japan, 80 is the new 65. And also, thanks to medical and technological advances, this evolution, it continues to grow and grow, which for humanity is fantastic. Therefore, if people have a longer and more productive life, wouldn't it be wise to encourage them to continue working for longer? I mean, even partially or in more comfortable roles. And that's where I'm going to leave today's video. But now it's your turn. Would you be in favor of increasing your country's retirement age? Leave your answer in the comments below as well as in this survey, and I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please do hit that like button if you did. And don't forget to subscribe for brand new videos. Also, don't forget to check out our friends at the Reconsider Media podcast who provided the vocals in this episode that were not mine. Also, this channel, as always, is possible because of our patrons on Patreon. Please consider joining them and supporting our mission of providing independent political coverage. And as always, I'll see you in the next video.